Hello YouTube. Today we're gonna talk about a beginner guide for Project Diablo 2. It will be about some general advice and I will try to make it as good as possible. However, if I was to go into detail on every single bit, then it would take about 2 hours to finish this. So I'll try to keep it as short as possible. Now in general, if you're a new player to PD2, there is lots of changes compared to D2R. In PD2, basically any skill can be viable, not necessarily from the very beginning, but on endgame you can pretty much play whatever you prefer. Of course, there's some builds that are slightly worse or better than others, but in the end, you can play whatever you like. Anything goes. If you wanna be a Inferno Sorceress, you can play it. It is possible. Of course, there are certain starter builds that you wanna aim for. For example, a Druid usually goes Summoner, although you could go other skills, that works. But in general, you're better off doing what everybody does in the beginning with their characters. It's probably for the best in order to get the gear going for another skill that you actually wanna play. I'll try to give you some examples. Sorcerers, for example, they can go Chain Lightning Arcane, Meteor Andariel, Frozen Orb Diablo ones, or Inferno Firewall for Duriel Questbug. On Assassins, that would pretty much be a trap sin. They're very effective early on. Of course, you can go Martial Arts. Those work wonderfully as well. Mind Blast is also a wonderful starter. You can totally do that. I did that myself on a solo self-found. But in general, you're probably best off with trap sins in the beginning. Chain Lightning Trap, for example, for Arcane. Wake of Fire for Chaos. Stuff like that. On a Druid, that would pretty much be a Summoner. That's what everybody does. You could go Rabies maybe, or Shapeshifting in general if you had somewhat of a gear. However, just going Summoner is the easiest way. Elemental Druids also work quite well early on, and they're very effective. But once again, having the summons and whatnot is probably for the better. Same goes for the Necromancer, it's probably just a Summoner. You can go Thief and Bone Spear and whatnot, that works, I did that myself. But for a very beginner, I would argue a Summoner is better. Barb is a little bit tricky early on. It is pretty much just a bleed build, and you do pits with it. On the other hand, you can also do the high demon damage. That's easy to achieve with like laying of hands and whatnot. And you can do Trabi runs. You can also do a Warcry Barb for that. However, the defense check is quite high nowadays, I would say. Not that high that it's not achievable. However, it is way higher than in the past. Other than that, you can do a Throw Barb. That works too. You just need a proper weapon for it, or two rather. And Leap is totally fine as well. You can just get an Immortal King Crusher and you're pretty much good to go. Leech and Leap. Whirlwind is also a very good option, I want to say, at least nowadays. But the gear requirement is also there. So the easiest way would be Bleed in the very beginning, just because you get it from mastery skills. Before somebody goes apeshit in the comment section, you can do whatever you like. This is PD2. You play the game the way you like. That's all there is to it. I'm just trying to give general advice here for people that just started the game or that are not familiar with certain builds. Moving on to the Amazon, it's pretty much a summon zone. That's about it. You can go Fire Arrow and Cold Arrow and whatnot. You can even do Plague for cows maybe, but that requires somewhat of a gear. So Summon Zone is probably the play for Amazon early on. They're quite easy to gear and super effective. You can do Uber Tristram on those as well if you like to. It is just a little bit of practice and getting used to it, but it's rather easy. Paladins used to be very weak early on, but they're probably the best class in the game right now, in my opinion. Sacrifice is very fucking good. You can clear maps in no time. Same goes for Vengeance. You can even go Vengeance and Sacrifice on day one if you have a couple of crafts and whatnot. That works. But a Holy Bolt Paladin never goes wrong. You can always do that. Holy Bolt FOH is very good early. Especially on hardcore, since, you know, going up close is a defense check, and if you don't have that, you might die if you get a, I don't know, conviction pack or something like that. I gotta admit though, Hammerdins are super legit in PD2. They are Omega strong, even early on. They go underappreciated in PD2 just because we played Hammerdins for 20 years in Diablo. Not many people wanna do that. However, I recommend it to you if you are a Hammerdin fan. It is really good early on. You don't even need an Enigma. Joust is really effective. You can joust from group to group and just hammer them. And the damage will check out regardless. You don't really need much gear for a Hammerdin. So that's it for the classes. I would like to go more into detail and make guides for each and every one of those, but that will take time and will not fit into this video. Alright, moving on to loot filters. As you can see on the screen here, those are the loot filter options you have. You can select it on the PD2 launcher. I personally prefer Cassie's filter. It's my favorite. I'm using a meme version of it though, so keep that in mind. Items might look different or have different names. So you probably want to not do that in the beginning. Just take a filter that is normal and you will be more than fine. But I do recommend using a loot filter. In the game itself, we have additional loot filter options, such as enabling the loot filter or disabling it. You can also bind that. The filter level, you can change that too, to your liking. We have chat notifications. You want to have that on. That shows you items that drop on the top left, like it's a message from somebody. It shows you the item level, the ranges, and you can put it that it always shows items so you never have to press Alt. If you hit Control O, you can open the D2GL extended graphic options. I'll just show you real quick what's in there. Talking about all of this would take too much time. You can screw around as you like. Maybe you find something that looks appealing to you. You can also just copy my options. That's up to you. It is all preference. Moving on to the regular options in PD2, you can select the sounds. As you can see, you can push it by 1% each instead of 5% like it used to be. You can disable the lobby music in here too. This option is vanilla. We all know this one. Video options are optional as well. You can choose it as you like. I disable screen shake because it's annoying. D2GL is the CTRO we did before. Automap option is also preference. You can copy mine if you like. I like a mini map instead of a big map. The big map confuses me. And we have a lot of binds in PD2 as you can see. Everything can be bound. I'll just scroll through this real quick and you can see for yourself what you can bind. There's a lot of useful stuff in there. I recommend doing a couple of those. Moving on to PD2 options. General, we have a DPS counter. You see it on the bottom left. We have a belt status. As you can see on the bottom, I can always see how many pots I have left. I don't have to open the belt menu. You can also enable showing item quantity. I recommend that. Experience meter on, I would say, and advanced stats we'll talk about later. Quick rest menu is optional. I don't like quick rest personally, but I like the skill bar and the buff timers. I put those on just to see how much time I have left on my buffs and whatnot. Auras don't concern you yet. I'll just show this real quick. I have the black aura from tier 2 Lucion. There's more for D-Clone, Rathma, and 99 and PvP tournaments, but that doesn't need to be talked about right now. Help will show you a lot of different stuff. As you can see on the screen, this helps you quite a lot. Hence the name, I guess. And that's about it for the options. In the help menu, you already saw a bunch of stuff, but I'll just show you quick. You can unstack runes like this. You can stack them again. You can put them over there and back into the stack. Socketing items we all know. We can talk to Lazuk. He gives us a quest. That's only once. But in PD2, we also get this hammer over here and we get one socket from it every time. So if you have a bad item, you can just use this. Other than that, there's the Lazuk's puzzle box. This works for uniques and sets. You can see the socket values right there. This is a puzzle piece. This works for crafts, wares, and magic. Something that is very powerful in PD2 in both end and early game is crafting. You can use the gems and runes and whatever, but I'll just show you real quick with these orbs, fusion orbs, I'm sorry, what you can achieve with them. If you hover your mouse over them with a lot of filters, it will just show you what you can get out of the crafts. Cassie's filters does that, for example. Early on, I recommend getting PDR crafts for your mercenary and yourself if you need the PDR. Other than that, magic find, cast rate, it really depends on what you need. I'll go into more detail in another video, but this is just a brief overview of what you can do with it. Now, as you can see, the general changes are quite big. I'm not gonna cover them all here. I will leave a link in the description if you want to read it for yourself. But I will talk about the Worldstone Shards and maps. Maps we go for later. Worldstone Shards are basically just an additional stat you can gain on your item. However, you also have a chance of bricking the item, so you can potentially lose it. In the very beginning, if you have a good item like a Shaker or so, I would recommend to not slam it. Most items are powerful enough as they are early game. I'll show you a screenshot of the corruption table real quick so you can see for yourself what you can get from items. If you want to check them out properly, there's a link in the description. You can just click on that and it will lead you to this website. This is just a PD2 wiki. As you can see, there's a lot of different corruptions for a lot of different items. Items have different tiers, so the higher tiers are harder to hit, but obviously are the best in most cases. But even the low and mid tier ones can give you a good improvement. Any additional stat will make your item better. At least for most cases. Some of these slams are sadly kinda useless, but that's how it is. Some people might make them work for certain builds, but I personally would like to see some changes on that, but that's for another video. Moving on how do I make currency early on. Now, how do we make sure we make currency in this game? Well, first off, we need to get to hell, and it really depends on what class and build you're playing. In general, you have the choice between either single target farming, such as Andariel and whatnot, or you farm AoE, as in pits, maggot lair, arcane, stuff like this. You have also the option to farm keys. Those are always valuable. People like those, especially early on, but all throughout the season, they will have value. Usually about a vex for a full key set, as in 9 keys. You can run it yourself as well. It's really not that difficult in PD2. You can do it on basically any build, given that you have the proper gear. Some builds can do it with basically nothing. Some take some gear. That's just how it is. We have to deal with that. But in general, I would recommend you to do it yourselves. In case you never ever did it, there's tutorials on YouTube for that, and also you can just practice it in pluggy slash single player if you have a file for it. Uber Tristan will reward you with a torch and a black soulstone. Those are used for declone. This is what you see on the screen right now. This is just a tier 0 fight, it will only drop you in any. If you go for higher tiers on Declone and Rathma, you have a chance of getting an exclusive item from those two. They are very powerful. Those items can potentially be best in slot for some builds, but they're really hard to get. And let's face it, 99% of the people will not get this, so don't bother too much about this right now. I just wanted to mention it so you know there's a chance of getting exclusive items that only drop in these areas. But we're getting ahead of ourselves here. So let's go back to some regular content style. A lot of people have the question, when can I actually map, or how do I make it possible? However, early on you wanna do tier 1s, not tier 2s or tier 3s. Some builds can do that, but in general you go for tier 1s. White maps are just there to upgrade them to rare maps. Blue maps, you break them down to a white map in order to make them a rare map. And rare maps are the ones that you actually wanna run. On the screen right now you see the ingredients that you need. I just cubed them together so I save some space in my inventory. There's also an opt of destruction which can turn blue maps into white maps again. Now, rolling a map properly. That is a very difficult subject as a lot of different builds are looking for different stats. For example, me on my sorceress and with my golem, I cannot do crushing blow maps. They will just delete my golem, and if my golem dies, I get a big debuff since I don't get my mana regeneration going. Some builds have issues with open wounds, some with poison damage, some with lightning. Depends on the build really. In general, you just want to make sure that you don't roll high maximum life. You want to avoid dolls. You want to avoid witches depending on the build. And you want to avoid souls. Souls for obvious reasons. We all hate souls. We don't know why they're in the game, but they are. In my opinion, they don't belong in here. They just snipe you across the map. If they roll conviction with it, it's even worse. So you do not want to do souls unless you have like a very high defense setup. Meaning early on, you probably want to ditch those unless you are like, I don't know, maybe a Trapston or something that is in the very far back and barely gets hit because he can dodge. Density is the probably most important factor. We all care for density. The more, the better. However, if you're playing a build that relies on single target, you can fortify your map. That turns the monsters in half, density-wise, but their loot goes up, as well as their life and damage. Which map you want to run depends on the build, again. But for example, for early mapping on tier 1s for cold, that would be Trojan Jungle. Fire would be sewers. Cold can also go into sewers, lightning can't. Lightning would be royal crypts, but fire can also go there. And magic, you can pretty much do any map. Some have a little bit more magic rest, some have a little bit less, but in general you have a big map pool. Physical is also quite good. There's a big map pool for that too. But again, it depends on what you're playing. For example, a Whirlwind Barb with Bleed can do a horizon map, even though there's decrypt and stun on it. It doesn't really affect that build. Other builds will struggle with it. So it really comes down to what you're playing. Now you can also make your map quote unquote better if you slam it. It can also get worse in my opinion. Some of these slams are just really bad. As for example this one, this gives me minus cast rate, meaning it destroys my maximum breakpoints. I am strongly against this. You shouldn't do this. So in general, we do not care for anything with density. Yes, there is some useful slams out there, such as 1% additional charms and whatnot. They're pretty neat. However, in my opinion, the most fun comes from more density. The more I can kill, the more rewarding it feels. There's also standard of heroes. You all know these from vanilla. However, in PD2 they do not drop on Uber Tristan anymore. They drop in Uber Ancient. More about that later. For now, you just need to know they give you more density, experience, and magic find. There's also something called the Catalyst Shard that will give you a random event on your maps. Map events are very powerful in general. We have the Summoner event, which is in my opinion the worst. It just gives you another extra map on your map. And the map will be sundered, so you do more damage in there, which is nice for your early days, but the later you get into the season, the less you care. The Goblin event is quite nice. He drops you infusions that you saw earlier in the video. He drops you gems, he drops you runes, up to Ist even. And he drops you quite a bunch of maps. So if you encounter him once, you pretty much have, let's say, about 5+ maps. But in general, you also find enough maps within your maps. Outside of maps, it's kind of tough to find new ones, but once you are in one, you are pretty much guaranteed to get another one at least. And if you can't run the map yourself, you can trade it for another map. Map for map trading is quite common. Moving on to the next event. Then we have the Catalyst Shard event. This is where you get those shards from. You have to kill a boss, go back to the altar, click it, and then you get 2 to 3 Catalyst Shards, so you can get another guaranteed event. If you do not use a Catalyst Shard, the event chances are 1 in 5 maps. Another event would be the Key event that drops you 6 guaranteed keys, like Hate, Terror, and Destruction. It will turn your map dark and it will spawn the key minions, but they are looking like shadows. Then we have the Dark Wanderer event. He spawns 3 times on your map. He gives you a random boss, such as Diablo, Shank, it can be anyone, and they will drop you 2 to 5 shards each. So a maximum of 15 shards from those events. Then we have the Geats event, which is probably the most powerful of them all at the moment, because he can give you any item in the game. It's just a lot of gold cost. An item is about 1 million gold, but you can get vendor price reduction. There's also the Mendel event. That one is basically just an experience event. So usually when you get that, you want to call in all your friends and whatnot in order to gain maximum experience for you and your friends. It's quite common to leave your map real quick and go to Act 1 to find an experience shrine and wait for your friends. I'll leave a link in the description so you can check the rest of the map stats and whatnot and which map you could run potentially. Your loot filter usually shows that as well, but if you want to gain more information on that, link in the description. Now, we're moving on to bossing content. On the screen right now again you see Diablo Clone. It goes down quite differently than to D2R. I'll explain all the mechanics and requirements for that fight in another video. It also depends on your skill level, so if you're a beginner, you probably want to push it all to the limit just to make sure you don't die in there, as you cannot re-enter it if you die. We have 3 different tiers on this fight, which is tier 0, it's the easiest, you see it on the screen right now, barely anything happens, it's fairly simple. We have tier 1 and tier 2. Tier 1 is about 3 times harder than tier 0, and tier 2 about 3 times harder than tier 1. The exclusive items I mentioned before only drop on tier 1 and tier 2, tier 0 cannot drop those. With the exception being Rathma being able to drop you infinite keys, infinite TP books, and infinite ID books on tier 0. In general, you don't want to get up too close to Declone, he hits quite hard, but there are some builds that have to, and it still works because you have a higher defense check. As you will see in a second here when I ID this Annie I just found here, you get different stats than in D2R. You don't gain any attributes, instead we get vitality and stuff like this, and they're all quite high. I'll show you the ingredients really quick that you need for Declone. The first one would be a black soulstone, those drop from Uber Tristram. When you finish it you get one guaranteed. The second one is a pure demonic essence, those drop from map bosses. And the third one is called a Prime Evil Soul. You find that from Diablo, Mephisto, and Baal. Again, keep in mind this is a meme filter, so the names are a little bit different, but you don't have to worry about that. You will recognize it when it drops. Moving on to Rathma. One of the ingredients you need is called a Splinter of the Void. Those can drop from the Mandel event, the experience event that I mentioned earlier. The second one would be a Trangul Jawbone. Those drop from undead enemies. And the third one would be a Bonfire Lit, or rather a Torch. Those are made out of torches. But you do not have to turn it into a bonfire lit in order to use it for a Rathma recipe. It doesn't really matter. It just saves some space in the inventory if you do it a lot. This fight has 3 phases. I will make a proper video about it in detail in the future, but for now I'm just gonna give you the basics. There's 3 phases in this fight. In the first one you fight Mendon by yourself. It's only him and you. After the first phase you get into a transition area where you can get your Jubies back because you need them for the next fight. And then we fight Rathma by himself. That is the second phase. And then the third phase, you fight them both at once. As you can see, it goes a little bit crazy in there. There is a lot of damage in this, that's for sure. Even on tier 0, at the moment it's a little bit overtuned, especially the Sludge Nova you see me hitting right now, this one. It hits way too hard at the moment, so keep in mind that it's very dangerous at the time. However, it is still beatable, even for a beginner, but you want to have a very high defense check. The gear you see right now I'm using is for tier 2. I'm just using it on tier 0, sorry, real quick, just to show it off. And the reward is something called a tainted Worldstone Shard. With that, you can slam your Annie, you can get an additional skill on your Annie, or more vitality, more res, more experience, or it can also brick, meaning you lose your Annie. It turns into a charm, a regular charm. Moving on to the new fight, Lucion. For that we need a Flash of Malik. This drops from demons. Any demon in the game starting Act 1 normal can drop that. We also need then Demonic Insignia, those drop in the red portals in Act 5. As well as a Talisman of Transgression, those drop from Corrupted Zones. Just to talk about the Corrupted Zones real quick, those are the equivalent in PD2 to D2R's Terror Zones. They turn any area they affect into a level 85 area, and they drop you a good amount of Worldstone Shards. In order to access these areas, you just have to beat the game, meaning Hell Baal, and then you will see a notification in your chat all the time which zone is corrupted at the time. I'll show you a little bit of the fight on the screen right now. In general, any class can do this. There's builds that are better and worse. The Sorceress is okay for this, but so far I'm the only one to beat it, so I really hope that someone else does it. The other classes seem to be a lot better at the fight, but that's no surprise. Sorceress is in general a little bit weak at the moment. So once we beat Lucian, we get another portal, which will open here in a second. And in this area, we can desecrate our amulets. It's basically an option to slam your amulet again. However, the brick chance are quite high. We don't really have the numbers yet, but my guess is it's about 50 to 60% on tier 1. We do have confirmation, however, that on tier 2 it's 10% better, so 10% less brick chance. However, the fight on tier 2 is a lot harder and takes a lot longer, so there's only a handful of builds that actually want to run it. Tier 1, it is pretty much fine for everybody. Tier 0 doesn't exist just yet because this fight is new and they didn't want to make it too easy. So at the moment you have to deal with Tier 1 at the very least. There's also a couple of super stashes in here. They drop quite well, as you can see on the screen. I already popped 2 HRs from this. It's not bad. I really like this mechanic. So those are all the basics I could come up with. Thank you PD2 Discord for helping me out on this one. I got some more ideas of the guys from there, so thank you guys, I appreciate that. And if you have any recommendations or ideas that I could add for the next video when it comes to this kind of stuff, I would like to hear them. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you on my stream or on the next video. Have a good one.